Good evening and welcome to the Hive Buddy show for November, our last one of the year. And thrilled to be here. How you going, Carmel?
I'm not too bad. How are you?
Absolutely loving it. So yeah, all is well here. Thrilled to be, I suppose, wrapping it up for the year and seeing what where we go to tonight, and looking forward to getting back to it next year. Let's see what happens.
This is our last one for the year, isn't it?
Oh, bizarre,
We
isn't it?
did it. Woohoo!
We've done it. We got here.
Well, hold on. I should be doing that at the end.
Yeah. Give us another hour, and maybe we can celebrate there. But look, awesome to be here, and just a quick recap for those that didn't get to join us last month, but also those that did. It might just trigger some of your memory. Last month we had a fascinating session. We normally do a little bit of a bit about what's happening in the world of Varroa. So Carmel gave us a bit of an update there. Carmel, you spoke to us in quite a fair bit of depth last month about flora and bees. So
Yes.
plants and flowers, and that was excellent because that's an area I feel like I lack a bit of skills and knowledge. I don't think
I still feel like a toddler there as well.
It's frustrating, isn't it? But it's part of the fun.
Part of the land.
You shared with us too the Ween Bee Foundation website, which had the powerful pollinators plant guides. I think I've got that right.
Yeah.
And that's a fascinating resource for people looking at ways to enhance the flora available for their bees in their local area. Now, I don't know if there's a guide for every square centimetre of Australia, but what surprised me, Carmel, was how many guides there actually was.
And it's expanding all the time, and it helps native bees too.
Yeah, unreal. So good. We also spoke last month. I shared with you a little bit about beekeeping in India, in the Khasi Hills. We talked a bit about that. And I shared with you the purest honey on earth. Well, at least I think it might be.
I'd love to taste that honey.
And we're, of course, talking about honey that comes from Pitcairn Island. So for those of you that are not familiar with Pitcairn Island, we're talking in the middle of the South Pacific, so far from everywhere. Amazing history, also probably the purest honey on the planet. So that was in last month's, and it was an absolute thrill. Tonight's going to be a similar bit of a story. We're going to go through some of what's caught our attention lately. We're going to just sort of see what we've noticed on the news channels, what we've noticed on the social channels that we like to talk about. And then Carmel normally gives us a bit of an update, or gives us a bit of a focus area. And it's great what we've already been talking about. Before the show, we're talking about honey extraction, and that's where you're going to take us tonight, which is unreal.
Yep, absolutely. Yep.
And then a little bit later on, I'm going to share with you a few things, quite a few different things actually about beekeeping. We're going to talk about bearding, beehives and bearding. I've gone away and investigated a bit about hive entrances. We're going to have a chat about hive entrances tonight, and we're going to talk about another country, as I usually do, around the world with beekeeping, and this time we're going Caribbean, or Caribbean, if you want to put it that way.
Caribbean, ooh.
But more on that later. Just before we go on though, Carmel, I'm just going to quickly mention tonight's sponsor. Tonight's sponsor of Hive Buddy Bee Club is, once again, the Hive Buddy 2024 Beautiful Bees calendar. So if you're wanting...
I am so looking forward to that arriving. I put my order in the other day.
I noticed. Thank you. So I'll put a link down in the notes in a minute for people so they can actually go and have a look at, they can go and order those. The actual pictures that are online where the web page is are not the real ones, but it's great to at least see sort of last year's one and what it's all about. But really thrilled about sharing that with you all. But Carmel, why don't we get over to what's caught your attention lately? Maybe you can fill us in on what you've noticed.
News. Dun, 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 dun. Right. So I do mainly Australian stuff. You take us around the world.
Maybe.
What's caught my eye? Well, now that we've gone to management, things are ticking along there in New South Wales. What's happened in Victoria, we got another notification from AgVic. At this point in time, Varroa is still not in Victoria, but I'm hearing rumours around the traps that they're expecting it in about 3 years' time. So that's a wait and see. And if we can just keep doing our Varroa checks, whether it be an alcohol wash, a sugar shake, or a drone uncapping, you have to do 2 of those 3. The other thing, though, is that South Australia has now created, now what's their name? The South Australian Varroa Industry Advisory Committee. So there's now a governing body in South Australia that will be overseeing that as well. And I guess because especially the almond fields, they all join up there at the top end of South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales. So that's kind of considered one area with all of those almonds there. So I think that's why they've decided that, it's management, because that almond industry plays a huge part here in Australia. The other thing that caught my eye is because I was looking up Varroa stuff, I always regularly visit the ARBIC website. And I noticed on ARBIC, they are raising money at the moment, and you can read more about it, but they're wanting to set up an investigative task force to investigate the importation of honey that basically, and I don't want to, no, I'm not going to name names, but basically in some countries, they feed the bees, they literally feed the bees sugar water or corn syrup when there's a nectar flow on. And so they're boosting the amount of honey that they're getting. Which means that the honey that's coming in is contaminated with sugar and corn syrup.
Yep.
And because of that, there's now reports that there's very cheap honey coming into the country. And so there was a big article from Appomondia. They were addressing it, that they're saying that honey's now available at 85 cents US for 500 grams or a pound. And I've done the maths. So that would be $1.29 per 500 grams or $2.60 per kilo. This is bulk amounts, right?
Wow.
And then somebody on a Facebook forum, they discovered on the weekend at the Rockdale market, which is in New South Wales, there was honey there for $6.95 a kilo. So this honey is infiltrating. Yeah. So I guess my message to all you beekeepers is, I think as a whole, we need to educate the fellow people around us so that they are aware of the difference. And like tonight, I literally got a text message just before we came on tonight. A lady, she's a local hairdresser. She wants to give little honey gifts to all of her clients for Christmas. And the first thing she said, is your honey raw and 100% pure honey? And so people are aware out there in the community. Yep. And probably over the last 2 weeks, I've had about 5 customers ask me, is your honey 100%? So I sell my honey at $24 a kilo and $13 for 500 grams. They come in a beautiful square glass jar, and I small batch what I do, and I really value the product that I have, because real raw honey is a living food. It has enzymes in it, and it's a probiotic, and it has all these health benefits. And so I think we need to stand our ground and like, don't cave in. If you're selling a little bit of honey, don't lower your price just to compete, but educate, talk about it, and help people become aware. So that's about it for me as far as news that I noticed.
I love how you're so passionate about that, Carmel, and it's about valuing what it is you've created alongside your bees. It's a team effort, and it takes time, and it takes a lot of time. Maybe people don't realise it's normally years of effort and time and thinking and thoughts and learning, education, stumbling over, falling over, deaths of hives. There's so many things that have happened before the moment that you've actually got some honey to sell to someone.
And like I have customers that come back time and time again, and I often hear things like, "Oh, I'm never buying supermarket honey again. Yours just tastes so different." And again, another beekeeper I spoke to just today, someone had bought a kilo off of him, and it's just a multifloral raw honey. Like, it's nothing special, but it is special. And he goes, "That's the best honey I've ever tasted." And he turned around and bought a 10-kilo bucket off of him. He goes, "I want more."
Yeah. For anyone doing this on small volume, and you're sort of saying you're sort of at a small volume, there's reason to not think that you've got a market for any honey that you produce. So why would you sell it for a very low price?
If people appreciate the product, they are happy to pay. They know the value of it.
There'll be some people out there, and I'm actually not going to be judgmental on them. Like, if they can get honey for $6 a kilo, and it's maybe has some honey in it, but maybe there's whatever else in it too. But that's what they can afford, and that's what they're going to be able to do. Like, okay, cool. But that's a thing. But there are plenty of people out there willing to pay good dollars for good quality honey. So bravo to you.
Yep, absolutely. So there you go. That's me done. That's what's going around Australia.
And do you know what's nice, Carmel, is the whole Varroa scenario has settled down. I know no one's happy about the fact that Varroa's here, but it's just everyone's chilled out a little bit about it.
There was one more thing.
Go on.
Sorry. There are swarms happening in Newcastle again. So people are starting to collect swarms, beekeeping starting up again. And I think we're so lucky that there's not really a viral count, or there's not the small deformed wing virus. I don't know if it's got no viruses or a low viral count, that we have. But anyway, people are starting to report of swarm happening. So there you go.
What I like about that, Carmel, well, don't like, is if there's swarms already in the Newcastle area, and technically they'd eradicated bees within a large radius around there, well, they hadn't, had they? Quite simply, they hadn't necessarily been eradicated. Yeah. So what hope
unless somebody's brought some hives in and then they've swarmed, or who knows?
I guess so.
Who knows?
I realise that we've talked a lot of industry jargon and maybe sound a bit technical, so apologies to the newer people. You'll catch on as time goes on. But if you're ever curious, just make sure you write a comment in the chat and we can help you out with that. Over to me then, I guess. I've got two things to share with you about what's picked up, what I've noticed, Carmel. One of them actually you shared with me at first, and I thought our peeps might like to hear about it. It was an article or a bit of self-promotion by Southern Cross University. The heading of the article was the Young Alumnus of the Year, Cooper Schouten. Now, Dr Cooper Schouten is a bit of an academic legend in the beekeeping world here in Australia. He holds the position of Director for Southern Cross University's Bees for Sustainable Livelihoods, and also the Honey Bee Research and Development Centre of Excellence. So he's deeply involved in the industry, in the research, and in that collaboration space. And what was fascinating, this article that you shared with me, had a little video with it, which I won't show tonight, but I'll share the link later. And he's doing a lot of capacity building within the beekeeping industries of Pacific Island nations. So not just worrying about Australia, but looking outward and open too, and recognising that there's a huge thirst for knowledge in other countries that may not have the same ability to connect with researchers. Well, he's making that connection. And they actually hosted the first ever Congress for Pacific Island nations regarding bees, and just recently.
The very first. Yeah.
We've been doing congresses and state-based meetings for decades, probably many decades. But this was a first for the Pacific Island nations. So it's just exciting to see what our clever people are doing here in Australia and how they're sharing that and taking that elsewhere and giving value in other ways. But a little bit of a shout out really to Dr. Schouten for his amazing awesomeness. I'll share that link with others so they can watch the video. The other one I wanted to talk about, Carmel, it's through some socials. We talked a couple of months ago about weather and El Nino. Remember we talked about El Nino,
Yeah.
the climate pattern which relates to waters in the Pacific Ocean and other areas, and how normally El Nino has an impact on creating drier and warmer temperatures for Eastern Australia. Well, we're in full swing with that, and a lot of our patterns of weather have been influenced by that in the recent months. And a clear example of that are the fires that have happened in New South Wales and Queensland again. They've been quite ferocious and drawn out. But this, I'm jumping in there with hopefully not seen as so much as gossip, but maybe just giving us as beekeepers a little bit of a head start. There's already some suggestions and some patterns emerging to say that we're going to go the other way very, very soon. So El Nino has already peaked, and it's shown that it has come quite strong initially, but it's already trending, or plateauing, I should say, and it is suggesting that it's going to go the other way by early next year. So El Nino.
So we're going for another cold, wet season again. We were just so happy to come out of that.
I hadn't seen sun for 3 years. I was enjoying it. So it looks like we're going to be going into a La Nina pattern for 2024. And the funny thing is I don't know if anyone's paid much attention to the weather that's coming up for all of Australia for the next sort of 10 to 14 days. But it's going to be incredibly wet over a huge area, and I'm talking almost all states. And some people would say, but Simon, it's coming up to the wet season, so we should expect that. But in an El Nino year, this is actually a really unusual thing that's about to come. And we're talking, normally when we hear tropical rain, we're talking right near the coast, and we're talking large quantities, but right near the coast. Well, this is large quantities, quite a fair way inland of Queensland and New South Wales, actually getting to some of Victoria too. And this is a bit outside of the normal El Nino pattern. Anyway, I've been a self-confessed weather geek for a very long time, and I know I've said that to you before, Carmel, but I just put it out there to you and those listening that I think we're in for more of a bumpy ride. I don't know if it's going to be good or bad, but bumpy.
I wonder, and I obviously a lot of my information is based on Victoria, so for you, those of you in other states, please fill us in. But I wonder, our swarming season this year didn't seem to be what I was expecting. And I wonder if the bees know. It was early and it didn't peak. It was not that frantic. There's a swarm, there's a swarm. It didn't feel like it had the intensity. And I wonder if the bees know what's coming.
So there was swarming happening in August, and not just a little bit, but quite a bit. It wasn't just the odd random beehive swarm like mine that did in August. It was quite a few people. But yes, like you say, it never really ramped up and became hectic. And I'm not sure it's going to be, Carmel. I don't think now it's delayed. I think it just didn't really eventuate.
Yeah.
Anyway, keep a watch on this, because I'm not necessarily suggesting I know what's going to happen if we swing back to a La Nina. Other than it just creates an interesting situation for us to learn and figure this out.
And we'll roll with it. As we do, we will roll with it.
That's it. Well, you should give us an update, Carmel, of what's happening in your apiary and what you've been up to with your bees lately.
Yeah, well, I mean, last time I was talking about these big flows that are around, and in my area, it feels like it's gone from the peak. There's a couple of spots that are still, there's an obvious flow on.
Yep.
And I still see lots of flowers around. I was standing under a tree today, and it was full of the rosellas. It was an ironbark.
Yep.
And they were having a wonderful time on the flowers. But yeah, so I think a lot of us have gotten in early and have been able to harvest early.
Yep.
So yeah, for me, I've had some really good, like I'm doing another extraction tomorrow. So it's nice. October, like I had a big one in October and now another one in November. So I feel like that has come early this year, and whether it keeps going or whether the weather's going to change, I don't know. But other people have been talking about harvesting as well. So I think just making sure you keep giving space to the bees to do that is important. But I'll talk more about that later.
Oh, good on you.
Yeah. What about your apiary? What's been happening in yours?
Well, I don't normally have too much to report because it's such a little tiny little apiary, but I've got a few. This time of year, obviously things can happen, but I have had a nice little harvest from just 1.5 boxes. So I've got 28 kilos of honey there now, Carmel, which has been nice.
Fabulous.
So yeah, and often because of where I used to live in the Yarra Valley and now moving to the Mornington Peninsula, and I know I've been here a while now. I'm still getting used to the different times of year to be collecting honey. So it's really early, like before Christmas is always unusual for me. I know it's probably very normal for lots of people because of the Yarra Valley, it was never till in the new year, ever.
Yeah.
So that's just one of those localised things that can happen. I've been cleaning and processing wax, something I used to dread and hate and let it sit in a tub and it'd end up getting mouldy and do all sorts. I just would never get around to it because I hated it. But I've been on the front foot with that, and I'm glad. And I'm just keeping it. Yeah, I actually feel like I've accomplished something. So I've been using a $20, what do you call it, crock pot.
Yeah.
And just putting a bit of like t-shirt material in it, and then putting the wax in the top with some water underneath. And it takes maybe 2 hours, and it's pretty much where it needs to be. Maybe a bit longer, depending on if I'm starting with cold water. And it just comes out like 90% clean. Like I'm not.
Is that like a slow cooker you've got?
Slow cooker, that's the word. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. So you put water in the big thing, and then your bit of material and the wax on the top.
Yeah, and I make sure it sort of dips down a bit into the water, and then I just keep piling it in.
And so when it's all liquid, you just pick it up and.
So easy.
Right.
And then I just leave it for probably overnight, and by the morning or whatever it is, there's a nice chunk of wax in there to lift out. And sometimes I just scrape a little bit of the bits off that did go through. But I'm just finding that really easy. I mean, don't use that slow cooker for anything else. It's committed to beeswax. But I'm loving that. I did some sugar shakes this week in my bees again. So that's just one of the methods for those that don't know. Hello, Kitty. A sugar shake for testing for Varroa. I can report I've got no Varroa down here on the Mornington Peninsula that I can find yet. But I confess, Carmel, I've got to confess one thing. You know, I've been sharing about my Slovenian beehive that I had.
Yes.
I'm finding it's getting
interesting to hear the progress.
It's getting hard.
Oh, okay.
And I knew this was coming because I'm not an extraordinary carpenter, and I built this beehive myself. And for those that don't know, you access the frames from the back; they slide out to you. Well, my bees are not particularly genetically engineered for low levels of propolis and brace comb. It's just a queen that I've had it needs to be requeened. But I'm finding, Carmel, that they're now putting beeswax in lots of different places, and it's making it really hard to move the frames out. They get angry with me quickly.
Yeah, right.
And that's because I tried to build this with precision carpentry skills, but when you don't have those carpentry skills, you probably don't get it quite how you want. Anyway, I told you I was in it for the learning, and the learning is that it's pretty hard. And I'm finding it interesting. And later on, I'll share with you something about the multiple entrances, but I'll save that for later. I reckon that's a bit of enough from my hive.
Well, can I just add to that about the precision? Sorry, my black cat's decided to get all smoochy. What people don't realise. All right, I'm going to hold the phone then. Thank you, Luna.
You're all good.
Lovely. What people don't realise is Professor Langstroth, Dr. Langstroth, that the Langstroth hives are named after. He spent a very long time going out into nature and measuring the exact space that the bees had between the combs and all the rest of it. And when he designed the Langstroth hive, it was done with very deep respect for all of the measurements and the mathematics that the bees had put in place for themselves.
Yep.
And I mean, you're not a carpenter, so you tried your best and you built what you built. But I think as times evolve and we've created hives for us, and people have gotten on the commercial bandwagon and gone,
Yes.
oh, I'll build a hive, I'll bring out this hive, I'll bring out that hive, rah, 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 rah.
Yes.
I think there wasn't enough emphasis put on the respecting the bee space and understanding that anything under
6 mil, 5 mil,
something or other, they will propolize.
Yeah. Yep.
Yes, anything under 5 mil they'll propolize, and anything above 1 centimetre they will build wax in it.
Yep.
And I often refer to the flow hive as the TARDIS, because and like I've noticed this myself when I work the flow hive, and when I teach it, this is a really important point that I make, is that the width of the flow frames are quite wide. And so if you have a flow box on a normal Langstroth hive, you'll notice there's a couple of mil on either side. Yeah, and so the creators of the flow hive, they made their boxes wider on purpose to house the flow frames, which is for human benefit. But what's happened is they've now created the brood box is bigger on the inside than, that's why I call it the TARDIS. And there's a lot of slack between all of the frames there. And you have to, it's time consuming to position each frame evenly spaced, because if you don't, you end up with Burkholm. And this is often where a 10 frame hive can sometimes be easier because you don't have any slack in there.
Yeah, it's in tight.
And it's in tight. Exactly. So I would love to see a future where I think respecting that bee space becomes more prevalent again, because hives will be easier to work. But now you know why also they recommended the Carnolian bees.
Well, and it's great you've mentioned that, Carmel, because that's exactly the type of bees, the race of bees that the Slovenians use. They only allow the Carniolan bees, and they have much reduced propolizing tendencies and don't tend to have it create as much brace comb and the like. So, I'm not working. I don't have the skills, the perfect skills to build the right hive, and I don't have the queen bee traits that give me a condition perfect for these sort of hives. But such is life.
You have some Caucasian genetics in there somewhere. I love propolis, but but not for your hive.
Yeah, for this purpose, it's kind of awkward. Not to worry. Well, take us there, Carmel. Let's dive a bit deeper.
Let's dive a bit deeper. What have I got? Let me see. Just looking at my notes here. I was going to have a beautiful presentation for all of you and show you some photos. But I'm on my phone tonight because my laptop decided to die, and I had a day and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I very cleverly made a whole heap of notes this morning. And I'd very sensibly put them all in order. So I'm just going to talk my way through and wing it like I do sometimes. But, most of the information's here. So extraction, I thought I'd do a bit of a deep dive into extraction tonight. One of the things to understand is when you put a foundation frame in, or once the bees have drawn out the comb and those cells are empty, there's actually room for the bees to go inside those cells. But once the cells fill up with like capped brood, and capped brood is hatching, right? And then they get filled up again and hatching. So there's a bit of a cycle there that takes place. But honey, once it's capped off, they can't get into that space anymore. So that actually creates some crowding in the hive. So fortunately, honeybees are really good at making more honey than they need. And as you learn to ride the waves of the flow, we can rob, because it is their food after all.
Yeah.
We can rob honey. And of course, it's a balancing act between continually robbing some honey, but not over robbing. You need to make sure that you leave enough for the bees. And anyone that's got golden Italians, they are big eaters. So err on the side of caution and leave them more honey than, let's say, carnelians. They don't eat much at all, so you can leave them with less honey. But what I do is, and this is a mistake that some people do, is in nature, the bees, they attach the comb to the top of the whatever cavity they're in, and they build downwards. And so the honey will be at the top, the most capped honey's at the top, and the cappings actually provides more strength there, and they build down. So if you've got a box of honey on your hive and you want to add a second super, plonking an empty box on the top's not going to work. So I'll often have a double brood queen excluder if I'm using one, and then I put the frames with the most honey on the top, and then my second super that they're building out or whatever, that's under, or some brood that I might be cycling out some old frames.
Oh, we talked about that recently, didn't we? We talked about that recently.
Yes,
so is this now, go on, it's a good time to do it now when you're manipulating where all of the...
Running a yes. Yes. Blah, blah, blah. Yes. Yeah, so this is where part of that planning that took place in spring, and you might have a frame with a lot of drone brood, or it's just getting really black, or it's gotten flat, or there's holes in it, or it's wonky, whatever. They're the ones. So if you're having a second super, you can now get them out of the brood area, as long as they don't have pollen in it, and get them up in the middle of that second super that's underneath.
Yep.
And so what I tend to do is, you kind of, for me, I create this, the frames go up out of the top full of honey, then I'll spin them out. Sometimes if it's good drawn comb and it's not too dark, I'll then put them, not necessarily, sometimes I put them back in the flow if there's a big flow on, or sometimes I'll put them down in the brood area, because the queen can lay in them straight away.
Yeah, of course.
So putting foundation in the brood area, especially when there's not a flow on and the bees are not going to build that comb out, that's actually reducing the space. I mean, they've got space, but it's reducing the laying area, because the queen can't lay in it until it's drawn out. So stickies are useful to go back down in the brood area sometimes if they're good quality. If you've only got one super on the top, then you might harvest 2 or 4 frames, and then push the ones that are most full into the middle. And once you've spun them out or whatever, or you've put some foundation in, they go on the outside, because the bees tend to build from the center outwards. So again, you're creating this flow, whether it's within one box or whether it's throughout the hive. It's this flow, that the rotation of the frames up and out of the hive. That's what I do anyway.
So Carmel, on that, like, that's a fair bit to take in if you're a relatively new beekeeper or haven't even got your bees yet. So I'm sitting here thinking that some people are just going, firstly, I don't understand lots of the words.
What is a super?
Yeah, I know we're doing that to people. But secondly, there's so much going on. And I guess I just want to reflect very briefly for a moment. It's important to realise that there is a lot going on with beekeeping. There is a lot to learn. There are a lot of points where you'll stumble. There's a lot of points where it'll become uncomfortable. And that is part of your journey. Doesn't matter how confident you are going forward, that will be part of your journey. So just realise it's not all, it's not all blossoms and sweet honey. There's a lot that goes on with this that's complicated and involved, and there will be many mistakes. But this whole idea of what Carmel's saying is moving frames around. Once you start to understand we talk about this all the time. Once you start to understand the biology of the bees and what it is that they're doing and why they do things, then you start to gain confidence in how you can manipulate their internal and external environment, I guess, as well, to be able to create the most value for you while still looking after the bees well.
Yeah. Nicola's just asked also, what about in a coffin hive or a top bar, which is a horizontal hive? So in that, be aware of where that brood cluster is. It's kind of like a football that's on the in a long lang. It'll be on the side, and so what I tend to do is I will put drone comb. So in my top bar, I actually have a frame of honey or honey pollen on the left hand side. So I'm at the back of the hive, and then one or two, and then the brood cluster starts. So I might have pollen and a little bit of brood. And that's near kind of where the door is. So the door's also near the left-hand side. And then I watch the queen, and I watch that brood cluster, and it will grow bigger throughout the season. And we're almost at capacity now. Once we pass summer solstice, it's going to start to close down. So if there's any frames in there I don't like, I will move them towards where I want my honey area to be. And sometimes, especially if I've got capped drones, sometimes I'll actually, and I really don't want the queen to lay in there anymore, I'll have a frame of full honey, and I'll put the capped drones. So I kind of use the frame of honey as a queen excluder, because often horizontal hives don't have a queen excluder. And then I'll put the drones there, and then I'll have frames that are not capped off and less filled. I do it that way, is how I do it in a horizontal.
So you're doing exactly what I just said a moment ago. You're thinking about the biology and the behaviours.
Yeah.
And you're just working within that.
Yeah.
So you're thinking about what the queen will think here. If I do this, what will the queen think? What will the workers do? What will their tendency be? What's the current season? Where are we at with the season? What's happening with resources coming in of the hive? So this is that background. This is where those that are new, just keep your background knowledge, bring it up bit by bit.
But like, I've been doing this for 12, 13 years now. It took me 2 years to even get my head around what was even happening in a hive, and watching that cycle. And like, it was just like the first 2 years I had no idea what I was doing, to the point where I was so desperate for my hive not to swarm, I didn't recognize it. And it was either a supersedure or an emergency cell. And I got rid of it, and I made my hive queenless. But you know what? I've never done it since, because it was such an important lesson. And that's where some of the best lessons go. Anyway, we digress. Let's get back to extraction. So how capped does it have to be? Ideally, you would love the frame to be completely fully capped. However, if you're harvesting like myself, I harvest whole boxes. So I want to take all 8 frames away. Sometimes there'll be a frame or two that are not 100% capped, but you want it to be at least 2/3 to 3/4 capped, so 75%. And when you pick it up, and if you tip it horizontally and give it a little shake, you don't want any nectar dripping out of it. So if you've got 6 frames that are pretty much 100% capped, a couple of frames that are not quite capped, that's going to be okay. But what happens is, anything below that, if there's too much water content, if you have all 8 frames that are only half capped, your honey can ferment further down the track, because there's too much water in it. Once you've taken the frames out of the hive, how long can you store them for? Well, 2 problems can arise. One is wax moth, if you store them where it's too warm and dark, like in a crate or something. And the other one is small hive beetle. So if you have to harvest because you just need to put room in your hive, and you know you're not going to be able to extract it straight away, put it in a freezer. And you can freezing honey won't crystallizes it. Crystallization happens between about 0 and 14 degrees. Optimum is about 10 degrees. That's where honey will crystallize. Once it goes below 0, it actually doesn't crystallize. It slows it down too much for that to take place. So you don't want small hive beetles sliming out your honey, and you don't want wax moth getting to it. And again, another valuable lesson, I just moved house and I had harvested a box full of honey, and I lost 20 kilos of honey to wax moth because I was like, I'll get to it, I'll get to it, I'll get to it, and I didn't get to it. So either harvest it and extract it within 24, 48 hours maximum, or freeze it and then you can pull them out when you're ready. Types of extraction. I thought I would talk about the different ways you can extract. One, obviously, let me start with your flow hive people. So you can harvest at the actual hive, or you can extract at the actual hive, or you can extract inside. If you're going to extract inside, though, it's really important to have a tray underneath the frames or the box itself, and you need to tilt it so that it's leaning back or leaning towards where the tubes come out, because you want that bit of an angle for the honey to flow out. I'm going to put some photos on Hive Buddy because I've got a video that's really important here. But when you put your key in the top, we noticed that we were getting a lot of leaking, and we were doing it inside, so it was great. I was able to film it and no bees got drowned in the process. But if you're getting a lot of leaking inside the hive, all of that honey is going to go into the hive, and the bees can clean it up. But if there's too much, then some of them are going to be drowning in their own honey. So what I discovered, and it's really well illustrated in this video I took, when I put the key in, I don't put it in the whole way. I put it in increments, a bit at a time. And when I turn the key, I try to turn it slowly rather than snap it around. Because you don't, if you put the whole thing in and snap it around, a lot of the cappings, they dislodge. It's like it uncaps itself. And then that's when the frames leak. But if you turn it slowly, the cappings stay in place, and then you don't get the leaking outside the frames. So that's what I learned, again, by trial and error.
Can I ask a question about flow hives, Carmel?
Yeah, go for it.
Do you notice a difference in exactly what you've just talked about in the method to go with that, if it's on the hive versus inside the house? Because if you're taking it inside, you might sit it there, you might leave it for an hour, it's away from the bees, there's no bees inside the chamber, the super.
I've seen leaking outside as well.
Yeah, because I think, but in terms of, I've often hypothesised, don't know the truth, but if there's still bees inside the flow, inside the super while you're harvesting, is there an increased temperature to that space? Is the honey more fluid as a result? Would the wax cappings be a little bit more flexible?
Yeah, you're probably right there. I mean, they do keep the hive at 34.5 degrees. So in theory, the honey will be warmer, and the cappings should be a little more flexible. But again, I have seen leaking that when it's been on the hive itself. So I think that key method, regardless of whether you're inside or outside, really makes a difference. You will find you'll get about 3 kilos out of a fully capped off flow frame. So that's about 18 kilos out of a 6 frame flow box. But the beautiful thing about flows is the bees might put one honey in one frame and one honey in the other. So unless you're putting it all into one bucket, if you are harvesting individual frames, you'll get different coloured honeys and different flavours. So I think that's pretty neat. It's cool. A pretty neat way. Yeah. The only thing with the flow is the bees do get curious and come around the back, and when you've got that stream of honey, they'll fly into that stream and they often get pushed down into the jar. So having they've got the little tubes, but if you can get a flexible tube that bends down into the bucket, so you can have a lid system, I think that actually works a bit better. Once you've finished and if you put it back on the hive in the open position. Could a spoiled frame be? Can you read that one out for us?
Yeah. There's Nicola's just asking a few questions about wax moth, because we're talking about wax moth just not too long ago.
Yeah.
Firstly, she was just sort of saying, so wax moth can destroy the honey. And the comment that I made, I was going to get back to you, Carmel, is that they can spoil it with their excrement if it's allowed, if the wax moth can really take hold, and the bodies and the cocoons of the wax moth, like it just ends up putting debris in the honey, and there's a hygiene problem with that. And then these spoiled, Nicola is asking, can these spoiled frames be recycled back to the bees like a sticky? What's your take on that?
Look, depending on how badly damaged it is, very, very slight damage, yes. But if they're any more than a quarter or a third damaged, I'd be cutting out the whole lot and melting the wax down and starting again. Because what you've got to remember is that there are eggs in there as well. Yep. And by putting that into the hive, into a warm, dark environment, those eggs are just going to hatch. And if you've got 100 eggs that are all going to hatch all immediately, that's going to put pressure on the hive. Even if it's a strong hive, those bees are going to have to deal with that. So you're better off just cutting all that stuff out. If it's too far gone, then freeze it, because you want to kill any of the grubs and the eggs, and bag it up and get rid of it, or put it in a compost bin, but freeze it first. You don't want those moths hatching and going into the environment. Yeah.
Chickens.
Yeah. Chickens, oh yes, of course, they love them. Yes.
Absolutely.
They love them. Yep. Yeah. Now, back to the flow, the bees will chew off once they recognize the frame's empty, they will chew off those cappings, and they just throw them down at the bottom of the hive, which they'll do. You can let them do that. But if you actually want that wax, you might leave it in the open. Well, it's going to be a bit sticky, but you can scrape off those cappings yourself. It's quite easy. And you can collect that little bit of wax if you want to. Okay, that's enough on the flow. Let's go on to normal frames. Obviously, with a top bar, you can't spin them. So the usual method with them, or what you can do, and I did this for years, was crushing and straining. It was 6 years into my journey before I bought an extractor.
Huh.
Yep. So the first thing I got, and again, I will share some photos, is I got 2 food grade buckets from Bunnings, and one of them I got my drill, and I drilled 100 million holes into the bottom of it, about the size of a centimetre, like my little finger here. And then the lid of the other bucket, I cut like a donut out. So I left maybe about an inch collar around the lid. And so and then at first I didn't even have a double strainer. I just used cheesecloth. So I had my normal bucket, then I had the cheesecloth, which I tied around with string. Then I had the donut lid. Then I had the bucket that was a strainer. And then I would cut out all the frames, whether it be a top bar or whether it be a normal frame, and I would crush it all, and it would go into the bigger bucket. So I often had a bigger bucket on the top and a smaller bucket underneath, or big and big, doesn't matter. And then I put the lid on, and I would put that into like a window in the house where the sun came in, and I would just let the warmth of the sun and gravity do its thing.
Oh, nice.
And I did that for years. And then obviously I had to refoundation the frames. But when there's a flow on, and in springtime, the bees want to build wax anyway. So it was about, again, using the waves that come and go and working with the bees to do that. So crushing and straining. Another way you can do it without, and you can still do the crush and strain through the bucket method, but it's not exactly crushing. Here's my Here's my bird's frame. No. All right, we're going to pretend this is a frame. And what I do is I get a spoon and I scrape the honey off back to the foundation.
Yep.
So I leave the middle bit, and the first side's quite easy. When you turn it around to do the other side, be really careful because you don't have the weight of the honey behind it, and it's a lot more flexible. And you literally, you're just scraping. So you're scraping away the walls that they built, but you're still left with a foundation which can then go back into the hive. So again, it's like that. You can still use the bucket for that method. Yep. Another one is if you really want to keep the stickies and the drawn out comb, you can decap the frames. So let's say this is the top of the frame. You can decap it like you would put it in a spinner, but get yourself a 60-litre crate or something, and maybe a rectangular. I mean, you don't have to. They can sit in the honey, but turn the frame upside down.
Gravity.
A cake rack. That's what I was thinking of.
Oh, yeah.
And turn the frame upside. So you've decapped it. Turn the frame upside down, and again, you can do all 8 frames at once. Put it into one of those crates with a lid on it. Put it in the window, and again, let gravity do its thing, and the warmth of the sun and the honey will drain out. And so then, when you lift it out, you've then got it'll take longer, but it's quite a passive way of being able to extract without, it takes time, but it doesn't take a lot of effort.
I can imagine that might be best part of like half a day, if not longer, letting them be in a warm spot. Is that an unreasonable statement?
Maybe even 2 days. Depends on the heat. Yeah.
Okay, good. But, I haven't done that.
Once they're in there, you walk away and you let the heat and gravity and time do its thing. Yeah, so getting them in there, you just decap them, get them in there, put the lid on and walk away. Yeah, so if you're not in a hurry. After that, I bought a fruit press. So I would still cut it all out and I would put it into the fruit press, which would squash it all down.
Yeah.
And then again, a bucket underneath. Again, I've still got a photo. I didn't even have a double strainer. I was still using the cheesecloth at that stage. And then, of course, the final thing would be an extractor. Yep. Whether you have a hand one or whether you have one with it. You can buy one that has 2 frame extractor. You've got to put it in one side, spin it, and then the other side. And if you want to avoid frames blowing out, so that means that the wax cracks, what I do, the honey won't, what was that? I missed that comment.
Keep going for now, Carmel. I'll come back to it.
What I do is when I'm spinning, I will spin slowly at first, and I'll spin one side, and I'll like half spin the honey out. Then I'll flip it over. Then I'll spin slowly. And then once you get the weight lifted out of it, then you can spin faster and empty that side. And then I flip back to the first side, and then I can do a fast spin and empty out the other side.
So you're building it up from side to side to slowly get faster to alleviate the pressure on the actual structure of the honeycomb, so it doesn't explode out.
Because one litre of honey is 1.45 kilos. So a frame of honey has between 2 and 3 kilos of honey in it. So when you're centrifuging it around, you've already got 3 kilos of, and then that force, if you do it too fast with all of that weight and inertia, it just blows the frame out. Yeah, so by lightening the load a bit first, then you avoid those blowouts. So there you go.
That's awesome. I'll come back to Sandra's comment, Carmel. It's a comment, almost a question. So this is back to your scraping the cappings and then putting the frames in a crate to go back to that just gravity mode. Just a comment there relating to, won't the honey drip out and as a result rise up the frame? And I guess you made one point before about having sort of like a cake rack or similar there to make sure you sit. Yes, it would be in the honey as the honey rises, but you're sort of saying have them sitting above something.
Yeah, or maybe you got 2 bits of untreated pine, or
Just
I
something
don't
for them to
know.
sit
We're
up on.
creative people. We could find some sort of stand, one on either end, and then put the frame between the
Yep.
two so that there's a gap underneath.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good one.
Yep. Now, so you've now extracted your honey through one of those methods, and you've now got the leftover frames. So the bees are really good at cleaning them up because they're quite sticky. So putting them back on the hive, even if you're not going to reuse the frame, putting them back on the hive for 24 hours to let the bees lick them all off, they can take their honey back. And then I would go through and go, okay, which one is not too dark and not full of drone comb? So
Yep.
which ones can I use again? And which ones that are too dark or wonky, got holes, too much drone comb, they're the ones that you'll then, again,
Yep.
if you can't process them, put them back in the freezer, because anything that's had brood in it and has pollen in it, that's what the wax moth will target. They will target old comb before new comb any day.
Yep.
So there you go.
Whew. There's lots going on there,
Yeah.
Carmel, as always. So thanks for sharing. These are the fun journeys that people go on, aren't they? Do you go and spend a fortune on a setup right at the beginning, or do you build yourself up? Well,
If you look, you can
there's
do
no wrong answers.
you can do the 2 honey bucket thing with a bit of cheesecloth is probably less than $50 to get started with.
Yep.
And I still use it. I now use it for when I do my cappings. I take that bucket with the holes in it and I put it inside another bucket. And then when I get home from the commercial kitchen, because we go to a community centre, I lift it up and I put the donut there and I let the cappings drip through.
Yep.
So I still use it to this day, all these years later.
Noel's made a comment just to me directly about the cells being 15 degrees from horizontal.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if you tip it upside down, yeah,
with that flow.
Yep.
And I'll share another time because tonight we're fast running out of time, but I'll share the science behind why they're on an angle, because it might not be the way for the reason you think. And I've had to do some research on that fairly recently.
So is it to stop the honey falling out?
I'll make you come back and listen
All
to
right.
another.
I'll wait for the science. I look forward to it.
But I will say it's not for the reason that you think.
Right. Okay.
Wow. All right. Well, we're flying along, and I promise people will try and keep a lid on the time. So I've got to just share my last few things, Carmel.
Yes. Go ahead.
And then we're done and dusted. So I wanted to just back to my Slovenian beekeeping that I experienced last month. I shared that my hive has an opening at the bottom. Trying to use my screen as the example, and an opening in the middle level. So there's 2 openings at the front. And as you go higher, there's actually an additional opening at each level. And I asked the audience, because I didn't know the answer. I didn't know the answer. I said, is there any limitation legally about having multiple entrances on your beehive? And no one could tell me conclusively that you can't, as long as bees are managed correctly. It was sort of where we went to. And that's where I sort of went, that's sort of what I confirmed. But what it did make me do, as these sessions always do, Carmel, is it leaves me with more questions than answers. Yep. So I go away researching further. So I found an article I wanted to share with you.
Great.
And I absolutely love a Perfect Bee website. They have some really great things. And this is a guide to beehive entrance management, because I realised I probably didn't know enough to feel intelligent enough to share. This helped me with this a lot. So bees in the wild will make, I'll read a little bit from it. So bees in the wild make good of whatever entrance space they're given. So if they're in a tree, they're in whatever opening, they'll make use of the space, and they'll make use of the opening however it is that they can. But in a structured setting where we look after them, obviously that can be done differently, and we can either enhance or make it harder for the bees. So I'll talk about the main roles of hive entrances. And you might go, I wonder if there's some there, Carmel, that you hadn't thought of, or maybe don't emphasise in your mind as much. But some of these surprise me a little bit. So we obviously know the main purpose of an entrance is for bees to come and go from their hive. That's obvious. They need a place to enter and exit from.
Yeah.
But it does so much more than just that. It talks about how it allows the colony to actively thermoregulate conditions inside the hive. In a minute, I'm going to share about bearding and being able to control the airflow, control the temperature in the hive requires those openings to function in a certain way.
Right. Yeah.
And that makes sense because you would have seen bees fanning many times.
Yeah.
But second to that, for the exact same reason, it's also how a beehive manages and reduces moisture, humidity from inside the beehive, because we know that nectar, as it's turned into honey, is pulling the water out, is essentially evaporating the water out of the nectar to make honey. Hence, there's a huge amount of moisture.
In my head. Yeah, right.
So there's a huge amount of moisture then created inside the beehive, and whilst brood eggs need a high level of humidity to remain viable and continue to grow, too much creates an environment where it's not so good for the hive in general. Anyway, so I thought that was interesting.
Short brood would benefit from too much moisture.
Yeah, and like a beehive generally likes. Look, I'm stretching my memory here, but I'm thinking a 65% relative humidity inside the beehive is a good thing. Like it needs more moisture than not too little.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the eggs dry out. I could be wrong there, but it's not uncommon for beehives that are poorly ventilated to be 80, 90+% inside the hive and be sodden wet.
Yeah.
But the third out of four reasons that entrances are important is it's a staging point for the transfer of resources from forager bees to the house bees. So they need a point where the foragers fly in, find the house bees take then whatever has been brought in further into the hive and decides where that's going to go. So it's also a delineation point between the different roles in the hive.
Yeah, right.
I hadn't really paid a lot of attention. I knew that happened, but I hadn't really thought about it a whole lot. And naturally, the entrances is also a really well-defined place for guard bees to protect the hive and effectively defend the hive. So the article goes on and talks about bottom entrances and top entrances and the benefits of the two. It started with bottom entrances, saying that it provides foragers with immediate access to the brood nest, given the brood nest is usually at the bottom. Good for ventilation from below, allowing for cooler air to come into the hive. But being so close to the ground, bottom entrances are often closer to areas where pests and predators may come into the hive. I don't have huge problems. I never have with mice, not that I know of. But in areas where mice are an issue, like closer to the ground, the less exposed they are when getting in and out of a hive, it's easier for them. So that's a problem. And again, a problem we don't experience, Carmel, I don't think we experience it, is skunks. Like skunks want to be down low, picking off bees as they go in and out of a hive. If there was an elevated entrance, that's not a problem for them.
Yeah.
The other thing
in Queensland, they still have bottom entrances, but they have them at least 40 centimetres off the ground on better bricks and stuff, because the cane toads love to sit at the front, and cane toads can't jump.
Perfect example.
They literally lift. Yeah.
The other thing too, which we've got a habit of having a full width entrance. So whatever that is at 28 centimetres, I can't think of the exact number. But whatever that width is at the front, that's quite a wide entrance space. Now you think, that's good, plenty of activity, good for ventilation, nice little spot for bees to land as they come and go. But it does increase the area that a bee hive needs to defend. So it's quite an unusual shape, long and skinny. But clearly then, if we know that, we can manage that with entrance reducers and adjust accordingly. And like you say, if we want entrances at the bottom, which usually we all do, then you can have a hive stand that sits them up higher and gets them away from the cane toad. So again, it's about understanding the biology, keep coming back to this, and knowing what you can and can't do to work with that. So then it talks about top entrances, and there's only a few extra points to add here that as a point of difference. Top entrance is good because forager bees get direct access into the honey super, so they don't have to find their way. They don't have to then pass the honey on and then it's sealed. It gets its way through the brood and up past an excluder all the way to the top. It's quick access straight to where it's going to go. So that's seen as an advantage. One of the disadvantages of a top entrance, which I had never really thought about, it's going to be more common for bees to put pollen up high where you would otherwise just want there to be honey. And that makes sense. Yeah. They're just going to put it somewhere convenient and suitable, and instead of being down low, it might be more often found up a bit higher. So by the time you do that and you think that an entrance higher up is good for ventilation as well, if you're living in a snowy environment, where the author of this article obviously would have a bit more of that to deal with, if you've got an upper entrance, then that sits above the snow if there's a lot of accumulation of snow. So, yeah, just interesting things to think about. But I found that an interesting article that just sharpened my knowledge around this issue of multiple entrances.
Very cool. Very cool. I think, and again, I did some research and I can't find it definitive. I thought it was no here in Australia, but I think the theory behind it is the more entrances they have, the more you might get robbing.
Correct.
So it was more for protective issues. But yeah,
and I'm pretty sure I must have completely overlooked that comment. Yeah, on the page I didn't turn to says, yeah, it's all about an open invitation to robbing by having multiple entrances. So yeah, spot on, Carmel. But yes, I could never find a conclusive no, you can't do it.
Yeah.
Is there an issue? Mike's asking, is there an issue with robbing and other pests entering top entrances? I would think so. I would think not just robbing for other bees, robbing for honey. Or it could be European wasps trying to get in and make access. It could be just about any common pest. It could be. Go on.
I know I've noticed that if I have a double super and the top super is pretty much all capped, the hives themselves, basically they put on a skeleton crew. Yep. So most of the actions taking place in the super below and the top super, there's a few bees there wandering around, but there's nothing to do. So they're maintaining the heat, but there's not as many bees. So having a top entrance would mean they would have to if there was bees coming in, like robber bees or some other pest, they'd have to respond to that and bring more staff members up very quickly to help with that.
And who knows what the ramification of that is across the hive. Yeah, it's all good thoughts. Deb's just asked me about my A to Z hive and what I've noticed. Not a lot, Deb, because I actually do, because I'm still finding it difficult. I'm only inspecting my hive in sections at a time. So hopefully next time I'll have some better information around what I'm finding, given the two entrances. But I am finding that top entrance is does not have many bees near it ever. Still, the main entrance is down below. Only a small number of bees are coming in from the top. I wonder how well it is being defended. It's a good point. I'm going to talk to you, Carmel. My last two things, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about bearding, because it's getting to that time of year down south here, or in general, where it's getting a bit warmer, and we start to notice bees pouring out the front of the hive and sort of being out the front. And it's for people that haven't had beehives before, they start to think, well, what's this all about? Why would I have so many bees out the front of my hive? It seems unusual. So that's called bearding, and bearding is a completely natural thing for bees to do. And there's sort of two reasons why you might see this large accumulation of bees out the front. And the two reasons are quite simple. One is before a swarm is going to happen, and the other one is to manage temperature. And Carmel, you're talking, you've certainly noticed the before a swarm version before, where the bees out the front, it's interesting because the bees out the front are normally fairly stationary. There's not a whole lot happening. There's not much movement. They're all looking a little bit disorganized and pointing in all sorts of different directions.
Yep.
And if you're really careful and pay attention, you can see that their abdomens are probably extended and that they look full, because they are full. They've consumed as much honey as they possibly can take. And Their full stomachs makes them incredibly lethargic, hence they're not really doing a whole lot, and they'll move only very slowly if they move at all. And they won't be fanning their wings, they'll just be as still as possible. So if you're seeing that, it is likely that they're prepared, and it's this time of year, or the spring time of the year, the swarm season of the year. It's reasonably likely that you might see a swarm eventuate shortly after. Does that match your thoughts, Carmel?
Yes, yes. When they're facing every which way, as opposed to all facing with their face towards the door and their wings out. When you get up close, there's a very distinct visual difference between a swarm beard and a ventilation beard. Yeah.
Yeah, and they say that this before the swarm beard is very much the calm before the swarm, and
Yes.
like
Yeah.
there's loads of bees, but they're just not doing a whole lot.
Sorry, I was going to say, and that ventilation beard, which I'm sure you're going to talk more about, is not just when it's hot. It could actually be there's a huge honey flow on and they're helping to move moisture out as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's where if you can make the distinction between which type of bearding this is, you can know then what to do. So if it's a temperature management situation, like it's a 35-degree day or even just a 30-degree day, and there's bees on the outside, they'll normally be oriented a particular way altogether, and they are creating airflow movement through the hive. And they'll be very strategic about that. They're very clever. You'll see, you might not notice it from 2 meters away, but the closer you go, you'll see their wings are actually moving, and they're moving a lot. It's very clear.
They create an evaporative cooling because they can go through about 2 to 3 liters of water.
Yeah.
Sorry if I'm stealing the thunder.
No, that's perfect. No, it's perfect. And actually, what I've learned too, Carmel, is often they go and collect water from the environment, like outside the hive, and bring it in, and they put it on they actually put beads of water on the junction of the comb of the wax cells, and that aids in that cooling of the hive. So yes, there's evaporation of water out of the nectar to make honey, but there's also water deliberately put in the hive to help with evaporative cooling. It's just such a clever little thing. And the other thing too is the other reason they get out of the hive is because each bee is a like a little space heater. As they move, they create space. As they do, they create heat. As they do anything, they create heat. So get out and stop creating heat in the hive. Do it outside the hive. So they're very clever like that.
Yeah. Yeah. So another thing to tell the difference between whether it's heat or nectar flow evaporation is at nighttime you'll smell that honey being evaporated. But and again, another clue between whether it's a heat thing or whether there's a swarm coming, if it is a cooler day, or especially at nighttime when the sun's gone down and there's not a nectar flow on and you can't smell that honey, if they simply can't fit in the hive, if they're bearding at nighttime or hanging out, if there's a nectar flow, they'll be creating that evaporative thing. But if they simply can't fit, if it's cold, maybe they're getting too overcrowded. So, yeah.
Here's an interesting fact or point. I won't say fact because I'll let you just decide that yourself. But it's saying is bearding is more closely associated with a nectar dearth than with the temperature of the day. So that a lack of nectar in the environment. And I thought, well, before I read on, I'm like, how does that work? And I couldn't quite get my head around it. So I had to look it up. And it says that during a dearth on a hot day, a beard is likely to form because there's nothing for the bees to collect. So they're not out busy. They're not busy collecting. They're sort of just hanging around going, well, there's nothing to collect. What are we going to do? Well, rather than being out foraging and rather than being in the hive, they just sit out the front. That's new to me. I'd never heard that before.
Yeah. I've actually never heard that either, but that makes a lot of sense. Yeah,
makes a lot of sense. I've got one more thing, Carmel. I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave bearding, and this one's just a very quick one because I did want to touch base with Cuban beekeeping. So Cuba has a really interesting reputation for very primitive agricultural practices. So stuck in like 60, 70 years ago, they're very isolated. Yeah, it is. They're very isolated from modern farming mechanisms and machinery and equipment and techniques. And it might have something to do, just might have something to do with Fidel Castro and the way that he decided his country would be run and managed. And because there is this essentially this dictatorship and this challenging environment to live, there's ancient vehicles, there's crumbling buildings, there's a lack of business access to international markets. But the upside to that is there's an island without pesticides. Imagine that. An island without weed killers, without fertilizers, without modern agricultural processes, and therefore it's nothing like the environment that we are in, that North
Maybe
America
they
would
have
otherwise
the purest honey in the world, or do they have Varroa?
They have Varroa. But fascinating here. How's you go on? Go on. I can tell you've got something good to say.
They have Varroa, but they don't use pesticides. So there's got to be more to this story.
Oh, you were asking all the right questions. So what I really love about this is they're essentially 90% or more of their honey is organic, considered organic honey.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is. And that's because most of their, like even with things like Varroa, most of their management practices are just by being considerate of their bees, working with the biology, being very aware of queen selection. In fact, the queens are bred by the state, by the nation, and are provided to the beekeepers. And they are a unique genetic strain that does have Varroa, some degree of Varroa resistance.
Interesting.
And
wow.
what they would normally do if a hive is overcome by too much Varroa or another problem, they just go, nah, that queen's gone, and they'll get a new queen. Which is not different to what we would do, of course, like when you think about it, but they're very aggressive about that, is how I read into it, and that they really concentrate on this genetic piece, and the queens are obviously very important there. So I didn't know much about, I couldn't fathom what beekeeping would be like in Cuba, but it completely surprised me that it too could well be one of the most pure places and definitely most organic places that you could find honey. Really surprised me, that one, Carmel, but I thought it was worth sharing tonight.
Wow, interesting. I feel like I'm getting to know the world through the eyes of bees. It's really cool. I love it.
We're learning every time.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
You know what? It's been a long session, and I thank everyone for coming along. It's awesome to be here. No doubt some of you will hang back and have something to say. Don't forget to go and order one of the 2024 Hive Buddy calendars. Just check out hivebuddy.com.au.
When do we get to see it?
I'm absolutely delighted to show you. I might show the people that hang around afterwards what it looks like, but it will be arriving by late November, so they'll be shipped out early December. Yeah, it's coming soon. It's coming really soon. And everyone who bought them last year seems to be straight back on the bandwagon. So that's a good review or testament to the quality. So we'll leave it at that. But wonderful to have everyone here. Thank you, Carmel, as always. Always a pleasure.
All good. All good. Good night. I enjoyed tonight. I learnt lots.
Yeah. No, thank you very much. Take care. Cheers.